I thought we'd look at the renewable energy fuck-up, which is only a fuck-up for us. Other people seem to be doing remarkably well out of it. Also, you should know I'm freezing because the heat pump that I have is really crap. Today we're doing the renewable energy situation, and I've discussed solar and wind and carbon capture and batteries with you before, and you can watch all of those videos underneath if you want to hear all the detail. Today, it's all about the money. So the fourth industrial revolution was always about creating an entirely new industry from, well, fresh air really. See, they'd done it once before with carbon trading after Kyoto. Actually, we might do a video on that because carbon trading and the market of carbon is fascinatingly outrageous, really outrageous. Anyway, we've all been specifically told that all our energy needs can be provided by renewable systems that don't need to use oil, gas, or coal. And the art to getting people to believe this is in giving them just enough information that they swallow it, and then hoping they don't go digging. The media, of course, plays their part, and so do the glossy reports written by all of those quangos we're also paying for, NGOs, which we also pay for, and global corporations, which we, of course, make profit for. And all of that information is provided to ministers, and then it filters down in convenient small bites to the public. And those small bites pass through all sectors of the public in all sorts of propaganda ways, including, of course, through schools. Now, wind energy is cheap and your bills will come down. It's better for the planet. The sun can provide all the energy we need. All that sort of easy to accept stuff is being told to people. And yes, of course, it sounds completely excellent on face value. Because of course the bloody sun could provide all the energy we ever needed. We just haven't figured out how to use it properly. And anyway, if we did figure out how to use it properly, it really would be cheap. And if it was cheap, then they wouldn't make any money out of it, right? The point wasn't to find the best, cheapest energy. The point was to build the most profitable financial machine and replace what we have now at or at around the same price. And renewables fit that bill perfectly. There are endless subsidies, new trading markets, green bonds, ESG ratings, and a whole new category of energy for the banks to play in. Now, the banks knew that oil, gas and coal weren't actually going anywhere anytime soon. And it was still a very stable business model. Growing a bit, but stable, not really any new money in it. Renewables provided a huge growth sector. And I guess here is a good place to mention nuclear, because by contrast, that doesn't fit the bill. You would think it would, right? But if oil was really running out, or if human emissions were really going to end up causing whole cities to be flooded by rising sea levels, then nuclear obviously would be the go-to solution. So why isn't it? Well, it's because it just has one big upfront cost and then 60 years of cheap power, no action for the financial markets at all. Look at France, for example. It used to be the poster child for all things nuclear, but it's actually closing down plants and pushing for wind and solar instead. That's why Britain stalled new build nuclear power stations for over 30 years. It wasn't because we didn't have the technology, it was because the money men couldn't make enough profit. And this is where the whole story of saving the planet falls down, because nuclear is the one option that could actually have delivered cheaper and cleaner energy. Mini reactors, of course, do make more profit, right? Because they are regularly renewed. And that's why there's some new interest in it. See, they break nuclear down into smaller, repeatable projects that banks and investors can actually churn instead of the one-off 20, 30 billion mega plan that ties up capital for decades. Small mini reactors come in 300 to 500 megawatt chunks, and they can be financed, refinanced, all stacked like Lego. Each unit means a new round of debt, new equity, new fees. And governments are also promising contract for difference. Those guarantees in the UK, which say, oh, if our grid can't take your energy, we'll pay you anyway. Yeah, and in America, they're being offered generous tax credits, and that moves the risk away from the money man and onto the taxpayers. Bloody brilliant. Money, no risk. Love it. And of course, it all really got started in earnest after Paris in 2015, best grift year of ever for these people. And it was set out in the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Specifically, SDG 7 was all about energy. And it says, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Sounds brilliant. Fairly bland, non-committal. But in it was the line, increase substantially the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. So NGOs, UN agencies, and the IPCC all sang from the same hymn sheet. 100% renewables was possible. And Paris was the chance to lock that in. Now, the Paris Agreement is a bit fluffier and less prescriptive. It uses careful language about a balance between emissions and fossil fuels instead of 100% renewables. But they did that because if they had written it down explicitly, then India, China, Russia, and half of Africa would never have signed it. So the hard sell was left to those SDGs in Agenda 30 that the quangos and the civil services would make sure were followed. No one needed to panic. Everybody would sign up, and they did. So as long as the people bought the story that solar and wind were cheaper, heat pumps were better, and EV cars were the future, then everything would be fine. And on paper, it always is. The UN planners are, of course, masters of paperwork. And as far back as 2002, Tony Blair had started bribing electricity companies under his renewables obligation to source power from renewables. He was off the mark early. But the big change came in 2008 under Gordon Brown, after Mad Ed Miliband had set up the CCC quango. Don't forget about those bad boys. And in order to force the market, subsidies were started. And this covered the enormous price difference between the much more expensive renewables and the cheaper gas and oil energy. By 2010, taxpayers and bill payers were funding the expansion of the solar panels on roof trend, where homeowners and small businesses were paid generous guaranteed rates for generating renewable electricity, whether it was needed or not. They stopped that. From 2009 onwards, the national grid began paying wind farms not to generate electricity when the grid couldn't handle it. And guess what? The grid still can't handle it. Up to 75% of the time, renewables are generating energy. Brilliant. It's cost us billions. And then, of course, we've got daft Theresa May, who in 2019 amended the Climate Change Act. Unbelievably, she took the existing 80% reduction by 2050 and made it 100% net zero by 2050. And the total cumulative support that the consumer and the taxpayer has paid in subsidies into renewables by the end of 2024 was between 220 and 230 billion pounds. Wow. And the forecast is for us to be landed with paying at least another 800 billion by 2050. That works out at £35,000 per household we are paying to corporations for absolutely nothing. And on top of that, obviously, we've got our normal taxes. And how's everyone else faring? Yeah, it isn't just bonkers Britain. Nope. We see the same thing across Europe, North America, China, even Africa. Governments have used a mix of mandates, payments, protections to make renewable energy viable because it isn't on its own. And what viable means is profitable. So Europe, trying to show off, led with aggressive goals and subsidy schemes. Germany legislated guaranteed payments for renewables. So did the EU with green bonds. You know, the US did it as well until Trump came along and trashed it because he could see what was happening. He's not an idiot. I know lots of people think he is, but he isn't. Now, China, interestingly, went on a mental scorched earth build, installing more solar capacity in 2024 than most countries have even planned entirely through to 2030. Now, don't think this was to save the planet. Actually, they did it to hugely increase manufacturing capacity, which would bring the manufacturing price down so low that the rest of the world had no choice but to buy all they needed from China. You got to love the Chinese. Brilliant. And that's where we are now. A decade and a half of subsidies, constraint payments, bribes and laws locked into a net zero framework that was never voted for and doesn't even work. All to save the planet, which doesn't need saving, when really it was just about controlling the oil and making profit. It's always about the profit. Really, seriously, it's always about the profit. Anyway, what do you think? Have you bought into this? Does your heat pump work? Because I am freezing. Leave me a comment, like, subscribe. See you next time.